Throughout Chickasaw National Recreation Area, the balance between the natural-made and the human-made is evident everywhere you go. Prime example of this are the springs out here at Buffalo Springs and Antelope Springs. We're here at Antelope Springs right now, and Antelope Springs looks much the way it did back when the Chickasaw first arrived in this valley coming across the Trail of Tears. It looks much as it did for thousands of years before that. This conglomerate cliffside coming down here has holes down here on the bottom underneath this rock right here where in times of water flow, the water's flowing right up out of the ground, crystal clear from the aquifer below. The springs here running through the valley here are very, very prevalent. There's a lot of them. This is the reason why people settled in this area. In 1906, a survey of this valley found 33 springs in the first mile of this creek. Antelope Springs is one of the springs at the headwaters of this stream. The water itself is about 450 feet below us. Most of the aquifer runs to the east of us over this direction, and rainfall that comes down over in Pontotoc County, over to the east of us here, seeps down into the ground. About a third of the water that falls disappears up into the atmosphere, is evaporated away. About a third is taken up by all the plants that are on the surface, and about a third of it seeps down into the aquifer like a big sponge down underground. It's flowing slightly towards us, towards the east, and wherever there's cracks in the overlying rock, you'll see the pressure of that water pushes that water right up through those cracks out to the surface at places like this, at Antelope Springs. If there's not enough pressure on that water, or if that water level goes down, then the springs will stop flowing. We'll get to that a little bit later. Here at Antelope Springs, this was part of what was known as the land of peaceful waters, peaceful rippling waters by the Chickasaw. The Chickasaw came across on the Trail of Tears. They were forced into this area, the Indian relocation, and they came to this area and settled. And shortly after that, white settlers came in. The town of Sulphur was founded just downstream from us here. In 1902, the Chickasaw Nation sold this land to the federal government for purposes of protecting the integrity of these waters and these springs. Shortly after that, it became a national park in 1906, and since then it's been all about the water, all about preserving these springs and the water that flows through the park. In some cases, the springs have been altered and modified for human use. However, Antelope Springs has remained much the way it did back when it was first founded. We're going to take a walk now over to Buffalo Springs, which is a very different place. It's a place where we've modified, over the last century or so, the landscape. Fuck this. Well, here we are at Buffalo Springs. Buffalo Springs is quite a bit different than we saw over at Antelope Springs. At one time, Buffalo Springs was just a muddy seep in the ground. Unlike Antelope Springs, there's no cliff face here with rocks and the water emerging underneath. It's just a wide open flat spot in the forest. There's some of those cracks in the rock where that water is seeping up. But in this case, it's just seeping up into this wide flat bowl here in the forest. It got to be kind of just a big, swampy, marshy, shallow place. A lot of the wildlife that would come here during the early days, there was free-ranging bison here. Then when the ranches started coming up around the perimeter here, we had a lot of livestock, would wander into the park over here and come into the springs here for water. It got really muddy and mucky. It was known as the Buffalo Suck at the time. And it was described as a half acre of smelly, stinky mud and feces. You can imagine, not a very pleasant place. One of the first park employees, actually, back in 1910, their job was to walk around the perimeter here on their horse and keep the livestock out of the Buffalo Suck. Well, in the 1930s, we had an encampment of Civilian Conservation Corps here in Chickasaw. National Recreation Area here in the park. For 5 years, the CCC lived here, worked here, and did an awful lot of work in the park. The CCC was an opportunity to put young men to work, to give them job skills, to give them job training, teach them about nutrition, taking care of themselves. They paid them $30 a month, sending $25 home to their family. They got $5 a month to spend on their days off. And over here at the Buffalo Suck, a raging debate went on amongst the planners and landscape architects of the CCC that really mirrors the dual mandate of the National Park Service. The National Park Service is mandated with both preserving the land, preserving the resource unimpaired for future generations. That's it. Preserving the land unimpaired for future generations, while at the same time providing for the enjoyment of current generations. This dual mandate of providing for current enjoyment while preserving unimpaired for the future sometimes leads to some clashes. Out here at the Buffalo Suck, this big wide open puddle of muck and mud, the landscape designers were trying to figure out what to do. Now elsewhere in the park that we'll see later, many of the landscape designers prided themselves on being able to design features in the park that looked like they were natural. One of the landscape architects who did with some of the dams at the swimming holes said he wanted people to walk upon his creation and see and think that it was there forever, that it was a natural occurring feature. Well, that was one side of the argument out here at the Buffalo Suck. One group of landscape architects wanted to design something with boulders and rocks here so it looked like the water was coming out under a naturally occurring feature. There was another side, however, who said, no, let's create an architectural feature, something that will stand out and will look like, it will be a destination, something that people can come and enjoy themselves at. This argument went on for a couple of years, and lots of plans were drawn up and designs made, and this is what the result was. The side to alter the landscape and make an architectural feature won out over keeping it naturalistic, and we end up with this very unique feature here. It's a large circular bowl. All of the water that was coming up, the source of the spring here, comes up in the middle. When this is full, it's filled about 3 feet or so, and over on the far side, you see when the water gets high enough, it goes over the lip, and this is where the spring starts. This is where the stream starts, Travertine Stream that runs right through the whole park. This is where it begins, right up over through there. There's a bench running around the full perimeter here. This is now, instead of being a wide open Buffalo Suck, Buffalo Springs is a destination where people come out and sit here, enjoy the peace and quiet, look in the water, looking for crayfish and other creatures that have made their homes in the water. I've come upon here people with guitars out singing. A couple of people have had weddings out here. It's become a very peaceful destination. But it is very different from a naturally occurring spring. Now, the CCC did a lot of work in this park, and we'll see more of it later on. And the contrast between Buffalo Springs and Antelope Springs that we saw earlier is really evidence of that balance between the natural, like we saw at Antelope Springs, and the human-made, like we see here at Buffalo Springs. And it's that dual, really a description of that dual mandate that we in the Park Service have, the mission of preserving unimpaired for future generations while providing for the enjoyment of others. Throughout this park, you'll see lots of that. This park has been manipulated and changed many times over the years, and much of what you see that appears natural was actually manipulated to appear so. Well, here we are at Little Niagara. Those of you who have been here in the height of the season know this is one of the busiest spots in the park. This place is filled with hundreds of people swimming in the swimming hole here. When it's filled up, Little Niagara it's about 12 foot deep and almost the size of an Olympic swimming pool. The dam you see up over here is a prime example of the construction that the CCC did here in the park. That rock wall on the top was designed from the get-go to look like a natural feature. When the water's filled up and you can't see the concrete underneath, It does indeed look like a natural rock wall, and I've had visitors come up to me and express surprise when I tell them that it was built by the CCC over about 80 years ago. Now, it has gone through some changes, and the changes it's gone through are really a good example of this fusion and the balance between the natural processes and the natural and the human-made here in the park. When this was first built, it was large boulders that were set in such a position and fused together with hidden concrete underneath and designed to look like just a natural collection of boulders in the creek bed. Over the last 80 years, the rocks have been fused together by travertine. Travertine is a mineral that gives this creek, Travertine Creek, its name. Now, the waters coming out of the springs up at Antelope Springs and Buffalo Springs that we saw earlier are heavily laden, heavily saturated with minerals. As they come down and the water gets agitated and moves around, those minerals come out of solution and are laid layer upon layer at a molecular level down on top of anything in the stream bed. The process was described to me once as if you picture a large truck filled with oranges right to the top, almost overflowing with oranges, and every time the truck hits a bump, a few oranges fall off on the side. Well, that's what's happening here. Every time that water gets stirred up and agitated as it goes around the rocks and ripples down the creek, it drops some of that mineral, the travertine, out of solution and lays down these layers upon layers. The rocks there, the individual boulders, have since then been fused together. The dam now that forms Little Niagara is a good example of this coming together of these natural processes, the travertine, and the human-made, the boulders that were originally placed there by the CCC in 1933 to form this feature that we have today and we enjoy so much. Now, out here at Little Niagara, you can see it's empty right now. And a couple of times I talked to you further up there about where's the water? Why is it so dry right now? Well, we are in the middle of a drought, a very long-term drought, and we don't know when it's going to end. We've made a lot of changes to the landscape here in Chickasaw, and as you go around, you'll see a lot of places like this that look natural, but have been altered over the years. The natural processes and the human processes have come together to form these places in the landscape that we're in today. But beyond the stream, beyond the geology, beyond the trees and the plants that we see around us here, there's other places that this process of the natural and human is coming together to make changes on the land. The very air we breathe, the atmosphere above us is changing. The drought we're in now is systemically caused by the changing climate that we're experiencing. The Climate Office up in Oklahoma City, the Oklahoma Climate Office, tells us that this drought is a result of our changing climate. Now, our climate is changing for many purposes, for many reasons. There are some natural processes going on that are changing our climate, but there's also a lot of human inputs into these changes. As these changes occur, we're going to see more and more of this. Drought conditions, loss of water. That fusing of the natural processes and the human processes that we see right here at Little Niagara Dam is a good analogy for what we see happening with the climate. There are things that we can do, however. If we as a society, planet-wide, work together, we can help change this and change the human element in that changing climate to help prevent more droughts like we have here today. Now, as you go around the park, I want you to think about this. I want you to think about some of the things that we've seen today. Think about Antelope Springs and its natural state as it has been for thousands of years. Think about Buffalo Springs, heavily altered with that architectural feature, but a wonderful place to enjoy the land, sit on the benches out there. That dual purpose we have here in the Park Service of providing for the enjoyment of people in the future as well as preserving the place intact for future generations. And think of Little Niagara Dam here with this fusing of the natural and the human, which creates what we see today, and the dry Little Niagara, the fact that there's no water in here, reminding you of the drought conditions and what maybe you can do to help forestall any of this in the future. I want to thank you all for coming out today, and if you have any further questions, I'll be around and we'll be able to help you out. Thank you.